DevSec 2022 podcast, sponsored by Cisco. We're certainly back in conversation. Day one, Cybersecurity Day. Right here, the floor is abuzz with conversation, and there's all kinds of people in the room, some of them representing law firms, defense industry, there's academics, there's government agencies. Everybody's in the conversation. Certainly looking forward to our next guest. Jane, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Jane Bates. I have been a lawyer for 19 years now. Started my career in defence, in the Department of Defence, moving into a number of primes, working as their in-house counsel, before moving into aviation and telecommunications. And now I work for Cox & Palmer, which is a regional Atlantic Canadian law firm, one of the big three in Atlantic Canada. We have offices all over the various Atlantic Canadian provinces, providing all kinds of services from immigration to litigation to property to business commercial. And so that's what I specialise in. I'm a corporate commercial lawyer, for want of a better description.
Okay.
I focus on privacy, but mostly big, high-value technology contracts, given my background in defence.
Right, and it sounds like you're fairly well set up for that coming into the conversation, because you've worked with a lot of the big players in the past, internationally.
Yes.
Right, here we find ourselves, right, in Canada in a very interesting time. We're going through these major ship procurements, a lot of companies in the room, a lot of high-tech companies, a lot of those clients that you just spoke about. I can understand why you're in the room. Must be exciting for you to be here and see what's happening in Atlantic Canada and Canada in the moment, given your background.
Absolutely. It's nice to meet a lot of the small to medium businesses that are in the industry. I'm obviously familiar with all of the primes, either having worked with them or for them. But meeting the players that are specific to this area, there's obviously a huge amount of ocean tech and shipbuilding stuff going on within the city. So it's nice to put faces to names and to get to know some of the players locally.
Right, now I would have thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe this leads into what your ideal client might look like out of this room, I would have thought some of those big companies, we'll call them the Thales, the Babcocks, the Irvings, would all have in-house counsel. But so how would Cox & Palmer supplement both in-house counsel, and I'm sure a lot of the smaller companies don't have the in-house counsel and they're leaning on you for help. So how do those two things work for you?
So I would say, from the perspective of the large primes, having been in-house at one of the three that you mentioned for 7 years, the variety of work that's done in-house is a lot of I certainly did a lot of the bids and tendering work, responding to government contracts, providing statements of compliance, those kind of things. A lot of that work is done in-house, but my experience is when there's, you engage external counsel in one of two situations. One where there's specialty that you just don't have in-house.
Right.
Sometimes that's litigation, because most of the teams that work in the large defence industry primes have, their team is focused really on the commercial corporate side.
Right.
But also, I specialise in privacy. That is becoming an increasingly more important area, particularly with legislative change coming up. Mm-hmm. So if they need specific support under those kind of things, so that would be one circumstance. Yes?
Sorry, I want to jump in there. Legislative change coming up. Could you just touch on that a little bit? Because I'm not aware of it. Maybe many of our listeners aren't.
Absolutely. So there's changes. There's a new Cybersecurity Act that's currently before Parliament, and that applies specifically to certain segments which are really relevant to national security. But it's not specifically defence, it's more infrastructure, mm-hmm. So the transport, the various, the bankings, all of those kind of things that are critical. And really what that legislation does is it puts a higher onus on having an incident response plan, reporting events, all of those kind of things. There's also significant changes proposed to the current legislation, the privacy legislation in Canada, which will really change the landscape around it. You know, the fines will be significantly more
Really?
expensive. So, you know, we're all monitoring that very closely to see the impact that that's going to have, and there'll be a huge need for legal support once that legislation, assuming it comes into force in a form similar to what it is looking now. So.
Right. Now, today is Cyber Wednesday here at DevSec, and a completely honest question, because I'm not sure how cyber finds its way into a law firm. Explain that to me.
So what I would say is that the privacy legislation requires you to do certain things, particularly notification around privacy breaches when personal information is released. So that's really when the law firm gets involved, but we always suggest, you know, if you have a data breach or you suspect you've got a data breach, you engage your lawyers early, because they can act as a breach coach and walk you through the process of responding to a breach. And that's particularly important to get them involved at the earliest stages, because then privilege can attach to, you know, your remediation reports, your investigative, your forensics, all of those kind of things, which may become incredibly important further down the path if you are subject to litigation. So you really want to be claiming privilege over those kind of things. So a breach coach will almost act as a project manager for the various parts of, you know, the remediation and response to a cyber attack, including comms and, you know, your forensics, and then all the work subsequently. But, you know, saying that, yes, we're absolutely there to respond in the event of a cyber incident, but you want to be doing a lot of the legwork before, you know, apart from, you know, obviously your IT and having sufficient safeguards from a technical perspective. You need to be having your incident response plan or cyber response plan ready. You need to know, you know, the kind of issues and the discussions that will be taking place, who's involved, what their role is, all of those kind of things, because let's take, for example, a ransomware attack, and, you know, you have very limited time to respond in the event of those kind of attacks. And you know, they like to happen on a Friday before a long weekend and other things like that.
Sure.
So you don't want to have everybody sitting around the table trying to work out, do we pay, do we not pay? You know, if you haven't had those discussions beforehand, because people take very different approaches to those kind of questions. So having that conversation up front is particularly important.
It sounds like getting prepared is a bit of the key, which leads into my next question, which is, when is the best time to pick up the phone and call Cox and Palmer?
Am I allowed to swear?
Sure.
Before the shit hits the fan, preferably.
Yeah, right, of course.
So, you know, as a lawyer that's worked in-house for a long time, it's important to, you know, be a trusted business advisor. So you're at the table from the earliest stages. You know, so that's kind of understanding the strategy of an organisation, advising on that. You know, I would never recommend to consider legal as just simply a tick box exercise, because there's so much more than, you know, reviewing contracts or whatever it is. You know, we see a variety of risks that the organisation will face, and we can help advise on that, you know, from both a legal and kind of a commercial perspective. So
Get in the conversation early is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
It's, you know, and not to put words in your mouth, Jane, but it sounds like Cox and Palmer wants to be a partner with them as they move forward.
Absolutely,
You know.
absolutely.
And I think that's a great way to look at it, isn't it? You're not part of the company, but you're a partner in what we're doing here together.
Yes.
Get in the conversation early, and let's not be surprised.
Yes, and it takes a very commercially minded lawyer to understand what the business concerns are. You know, I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I've said no, but the reality is I lay out the options that are, you know, minimise your legal risk and are legal.
Right.
But it's really up to the business to make the decision what risks they want to accept and how they want to move forward. It's not for me to make that decision for them.
Right.
I'm the advisor. And
Lay those options out, and right.
that's right. And
Yeah.
if they choose to not follow my legal advice, It's not ideal, but but the risk falls on them.
Right. Well, I have to tell you, that was an incredible conversation, and it certainly opened my eyes to how Cox and Palmer can help a lot of these companies and when they should be in that conversation. So thank you very much for being on the show with us today.
Not a
and
problem.
We certainly appreciate it, and certainly appreciate what Cox and Palmer is doing and what they add to this conversation at DEFCON. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Jane.